Snow moved like breath over the desolate Wyoming plains, soft and merciless. A gray sky hung low, pressing down on the wooden bones of Broken Creek. Beneath that endless hush, a woman walked barefoot, her thin shawl whipping against the wind. In her arms, a bundle, quiet, trembling, wrapped in burlap. Behind her, two small figures trudged through the white, their faces red with cold, eyes wide with something beyond fear. Clara May Hollis did not look back. There was nothing to look back to. Only the echo of a slammed door, a man's slurred curse, and the sound of boots fading into the storm. Each step she took left blood where snow should have been. The cold bit into her, but shame bit deeper. The town's bell tolled noon, its sound hollow, swallowed by wind. She entered the square as if stepping into judgment. Windows lifted. Faces appeared, cautious, disapproving. Women clutching their coats tighter, men with hats pulled low. No one spoke first. They rarely did when cruelty felt easier than kindness. Clara's eyes were glassy, unfocused. She swayed as her eldest daughter tugged her sleeve. The child whispered, "Mama, I can't feel my hands." Clara knelt, pressing the girl's fingers between her own, rubbing warmth into them though her own hands shook violently. "Just a little longer, honey. Just a little longer." Sheriff Darrell Pike emerged from his office, chewing tobacco, his eyes narrow as a knife's edge. "Clara May?" he called, his voice carrying that mix of authority and disbelief reserved for trouble that shouldn't have survived the night. "Where's Hank?" She looked up, snowflakes crusting her lashes. "Gone," she said softly. The sheriff spat into the slush. "Gone where?" "Does it matter?" Her voice cracked. "He said he's done fathering girls." A silence spread, slow and choking. Martha Clay, from behind the bakery counter, crossed herself and whispered to the woman beside her. 3 daughters, and not a son between them. Poor things cursed. The whisper wasn't meant to carry, but it did. They always did in Broken Creek, Clara heard. Her shoulders hunched as though to make herself smaller, to disappear into her own shadow. One of the girls began to cry, her breath forming small ghosts in the air. Sheriff Pike sighed, rubbing his gloved hands together. "We got no shelter left, Clara. The boarding house is full. Maybe Martha's got a corner." "Not for that kind," Martha interrupted quickly, feigning sorrow. "You know how folks talk. Best she move along before sundown." The sheriff nodded, already turning away. "Sorry, Clara. Ain't my business to meddle." Clara nodded too, a hollow motion that looked like surrender. She turned, clutching the bundle tighter against her chest. Her youngest daughter coughed, a thin, raw sound that twisted the air. Snow thickened, spinning like ashes around them. A horse's whinny broke through the murmuring. Heads turned as a tall figure on horseback rode into town. The man's coat was dusted with frost, hat rimmed with ice. Boone Calhoun, the giant rancher from the northern hills, known for silence, for the size of his hands, for the fact he lived alone. Some said he'd lost his wife to a blizzard. Others said he'd driven her away with his quietness. Either way, no one knew what truly haunted him. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking deep into snow. The street fell quiet in that way it does when decency still has a chance to speak. His eyes, gray, unreadable, settled on Clara May. Sheriff Pike muttered, "Don't get involved, Boone. Ain't your concern." Boone didn't answer. He walked forward, the boards of the walkway creaking under his weight. When he stopped before her, the wind seemed to pause, curious. Her girls hid behind her skirt. He studied her for a long time, her torn hem, the swelling on her cheek, the blood on her foot. "You got a place to go?" His voice was deep, low as a winter river. Clara hesitated, pride wrestling with need. "No, sir. You got kin?" "None that would have me." He looked away for a moment, jaw tight, as though deciding whether mercy was worth the gossip it would bring. Then he said, almost under his breath, "Then come with me." The words dropped like a stone into the silence. No one breathed. Sheriff Pike took off his hat, scratched his head. "Now, Boone, that's—" But Boone had already lifted the youngest girl in his arms. The child clung to his coat without hesitation. Clara froze, uncertain if she was dreaming. "Come on," he said again. Not unkindly. She looked at the faces staring at her. The cold eyes, the turned shoulders, and something inside her cracked open. Something that had been clenched for years. She followed. Boone helped her onto his horse, settled the girls around her, then mounted behind. The mare started forward through the snow, hooves muffled. Clara glanced back once, at the shrinking town and its whispering windows. No one waved. The wind carried only the faint creak of a sign. Mercy's General Store. The name stung. They rode through the white wilderness, the air sharp as glass. Boone said nothing. The world was soundless except for the horse's breathing and the dull rhythm of hooves. Clara's mind drifted to the day her husband first hit her. How she'd convinced herself it was love's exhaustion. How she'd apologized for his temper. She blinked away the memory and fixed her eyes on the horizon. After an hour, her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Boone noticed, shifted slightly, and without a word pulled his coat around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar and horsehide. She opened her mouth to protest but stopped. The warmth spread slowly, achingly. By the time they reached his ranch, night had fallen. The cabin stood at the edge of a frozen creek, its windows glowing faintly gold against the black pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, rising like a promise. Boone dismounted, helped the girls down, and led them inside. The warmth hit her like a shock. A fire crackled in the hearth. Boots lined neatly by the door. A table with 2 chairs, one smaller than the other, as if once meant for someone who never came back. He removed his gloves, set a kettle on the stove, then turned to face her. "You can stay here till the storm passes," he said simply. She nodded. Unsure whether to thank him or cry, he poured her coffee instead of words. The smell filled the room, bitter, grounding. Her daughters fell asleep in a corner, exhaustion claiming them faster than comfort could. Boone covered them with a blanket. Clara sat near the fire, her hands wrapped around the warm tin cup. The silence between them was thick but not cruel. She looked at him then, the width of his shoulders, the faint scar along his jaw, the gentleness with which he handled the kettle. He didn't look like a savior, but he didn't look away either. "Why'd you help us?" she asked, voice nearly lost to the crackling wood. He poked the fire, watching sparks leap. "Ain't right what folks done. Winter's cruel enough." She lowered her gaze, a tear sliding silently onto her knuckles. Outside, the wind moaned, pressing against the walls as if to remind them both it was still there, waiting. Boone stood, fetched bread and salted meat, placed them on the table. She ate slowly, tasting something she hadn't felt in months: safety. When the dishes were cleared, he brought out another blanket and laid it on the chair nearest the fire. "You can sit here till morning. I'll be in the loft." Clara wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck. She only nodded, and he understood that was enough. The room settled into a hush broken only by the fire's breathing. The girls slept, small faces illuminated by amber light. Boone's footsteps creaked above once, then fell still. Clara leaned back, eyes half closed. The warmth lulled her, but her mind kept wandering. To the town, to the shame, to the way his hand had steadied her when lifting her onto the horse. She hadn't been touched gently in years. That thought frightened her more than the cold. She stood and stepped quietly to the window. Outside, snow drifted against the fence posts. The moon lay pale over the frozen land. Everything looked fragile, breakable. She pressed her hand against the glass, whispering a prayer she hadn't used in a long while. Something about grace, or the strength to stay. Behind her, the fire popped. She turned slightly, half expecting Boone to come down, to speak, but he didn't. He'd given her silence instead of pity, and somehow that was the kindest thing of all. She sat again, close to the fire, feeling its heat seep into her bones. The girls stirred in their sleep, murmuring her name. For the first time in a long time, she smiled. A small, private smile no one needed to see. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin the air felt steady, alive. The narrator's voice, soft as wind through a graveyard of snow, might have said, "Some nights, mercy don't come with words or promises. It comes wearing a rancher's coat, carrying silence like shelter." And as the night deepened, Clara's eyes closed. The storm could roar all it wanted. For now, warmth held her. The story wasn't over, but for the first time, she wasn't walking alone. Morning found the ranch painted in quiet gold. The storm had passed, leaving the world dressed in white silk and shadow. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the faint rhythm of an axe splitting wood outside. The fire in the hearth had died to a whisper, yet the room held warmth, the kind that lingered when someone cared enough to keep it alive through the night. Her daughters slept in a heap of blankets, their small breaths fogging the air like prayers. She rose, her limbs stiff, her body remembering cold and fear before comfort. Through the frost-laced window, she saw Boone Calhoun, tall, deliberate, swinging the axe with the solemn patience of a man who'd made peace with loneliness. His coat hung open, steam rising from his breath in the brittle air. There was rhythm in his motion, as if he were splitting not just wood, but the silence that had ruled his life for too long. Clara pressed her hand against the glass. It surprised her, the warmth of her own palm, proof she was still here. She wrapped herself in his coat, left by the fire, and stepped outside. The snow squeaked under her bare feet. Boone paused mid-swing, turning slightly, eyes unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "You shouldn't be out here," he said softly. "I wanted to thank you," she replied. Her voice still carried the tremor of someone unused to being heard. He set the axe down. Ain't no need for that. But there was, and she knew it. She glanced at the woodpile, taller than she was. "You've been up long enough." His tone held no pride, only truth. The morning light caught his face, and for the first time, she noticed the small scar at the corner of his mouth, a remnant of some old story he would never tell. Her eyes lingered a moment too long before she turned away. "The girls should eat soon," she said, retreating toward the house. Inside, she set about making breakfast with unfamiliar steadiness. The pan hissed, the girls laughed softly, and the cabin filled with the scent of frying bacon and wood smoke. It felt wrong to feel safe, but she let it happen anyway. Later that week, the first visitor came. Martha Clay rode up with a basket of food, her shawl pulled tight and her mouth tighter. "Brought you some bread and sugar," she said, stepping in without invitation. Her eyes darted over the cabin, Boone's coat draped near the fire, Clara's sewing on the chair, the girls giggling by the window. Martha's judgment filled the space before her words did. "You've found yourself quite the arrangement, haven't you?" Clara's throat closed. "He's been kind, that's all." "Kindness turns to scandal fast out here," Martha replied. "You best mind what people see." Boone entered just then, carrying hay for the horses. Martha's face brightened falsely. "Mr. Calhoun, folks in town are talking. They say you've gone soft." Boone didn't look up. "Town talks about everything but what matters." Martha's smile flickered, unsure if she'd been insulted. She set the basket down. "Well, I've done my Christian duty." Her boots crunched against the snow as she left. When the door closed, Clara stared at her hands. "Maybe she's right," she whispered. "Maybe we shouldn't stay." Boone looked at her for a long time. "You and the girls stay as long as you need. Town don't feed you. I do." There was no tenderness in his tone, just quiet conviction. And somehow that was more comforting than any softness could have been. Days passed into weeks. The snow began to soften at the edges. The creek, once frozen solid, murmured beneath its shell of ice. Boone taught the girls how to brush the horses, how to mend a saddle strap. Clara found herself humming as she worked, something she hadn't done since her mother's kitchen years ago. She baked biscuits, mended Boone's torn shirt, tended to small things that had gone unloved in his home. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire, sharing silence that felt less like distance and more like understanding. Once, when she burned her hand on the stove, he reached out instinctively, cooling it with a damp cloth. Their eyes met, just a glance brief and electric. She saw in him not pity but recognition, as if he too had been broken and rebuilt by solitude. The days grew longer. Spring teased the edges of the valley, and with the thaw came something darker, a shadow riding hard from the south. It was near dusk when Boone saw him first. A rider, fast and wild, cutting through the snowmelt trail with two others behind him. The way he leaned in the saddle, Boone knew trouble before it arrived. He stepped off the porch, hand resting on his belt, but not his gun. Clara came to the doorway, a dish rag still in her hands. Her face went pale. "It's him, her husband, Hank Hollis." Drunk, even from a distance, his voice carried before his face did. "You think you can shame me, woman? Hiding out with another man?" Clara's daughters clung to her skirt, trembling. Boone stepped forward, his shadow long in the amber light. "You best turn around, Hank. This ain't your ground." Hank laughed, mean and hollow. "You think you can keep what's mine?" He dismounted, swaggering forward, snow splattering under his boots. "She's my wife. Those are my girls." Clara's breath came sharp. "You left us to die." He turned to her, eyes glassy, smile crooked. "Should have died, maybe. Would have saved me the shame." Boone moved closer, quiet and steady. "That's enough," Hank sneered, pulling his gun halfway from its holster. "You threatening me, rancher?" "I'm saying you don't raise your hand here," Boone said, voice low, like the growl of a winter storm returning. The air went still. Even the horses stopped shifting. The two men behind Hank hesitated, sensing something dangerous in Boone's calm. Hank spat into the snow. "You'll regret this." Boone's voice dropped to a whisper. "Not half as much as you will if you touch her again." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Hank lunged. His gun flashed up, but Boone was faster. He struck, disarming him in one smooth motion and sending him sprawling into the snow. The sound of the pistol hitting the frozen ground echoed through the valley. The girls screamed. Clara stood frozen, torn between terror and awe. Boone didn't draw his own weapon. He simply stood over the man, breathing hard, his eyes dark with something unspoken. "Leave," he said. But Hank laughed again, blood at his lip. You think she's worth fighting for? She's nothing. Clara stepped forward before she could think. Stop! Her voice rang sharp and clear. Boone froze, surprised. She walked toward Hank, each step unshaking. You don't own me anymore, she said, and her voice was steady, strong. You never did. Hank looked at her, bewildered, as if the woman before him was someone he'd never met. She stood tall despite the bruises, the scars, the years of silence. For a moment, he saw something in her eyes that even Boone hadn't seen yet. Absolute defiance born from surviving too long. Hank staggered back, eyes darting to Boone, then to the children. He spat once more, then climbed onto his horse without another word. The others followed. Snow sprayed in their wake as they rode off toward the dying sun. When the sound of hooves faded, Clara let out a long, trembling breath. Boone turned toward her, his hands loose at his sides. Neither spoke. The girls ran into her arms, sobbing, but she only smiled through the tears, holding them tight. The world seemed to exhale with them. The wind softened. The creek sang. Later, when night came, Boone sat on the porch, pipe in hand, watching the moon rise over the hills. Clara stepped out quietly, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. The stars above were bright, scattered like silver dust across black velvet. He's gone, she said softly. For good, Boone replied. She looked at him, her face half shadow, half light. You didn't have to fight him, he shook his head. Wasn't fighting him, was stopping a storm. The silence between them was warm now, full of everything they didn't need to say. The girls slept inside, safe, dreaming of horses and sunshine. Clara stood beside Boone, her hand brushing against his sleeve. He didn't move away. They stayed like that for a long while, two silhouettes against a field of melting snow, breathing in the same quiet air. The moon rose higher, and the land began to thaw, both around them and within them. By the time spring arrived, green touched the edges of the hills, and Clara laughed easily again. The ranch felt alive, birds returning, the creek running free. Boone built a small fence for the girls' ponies, carving each post with care. Clara tended the garden, her hands firm in the soil, grounding herself in something new. One evening, she caught Boone watching her from the barn door. Their eyes met, soft and sure. She didn't smile, and he didn't need her to. Some feelings out here grew quiet as wildflowers, rooted deep, unseen until the light found them. As dusk deepened, she whispered to herself, almost prayerfully, "We made it," and from somewhere, maybe the wind, maybe memory, a voice seemed to echo. Some homes are not built from wood or stone, but from mercy shared between two souls who've known hunger and still choose to feed each other. If you ever find yourself standing in the cold wind of this world, think of Clara May, the woman who walked barefoot through snow and found warmth not in walls, but in the steady heart of a man who simply said, "Come with me." Maybe mercy, in the end, is the bravest kind of love. And if you'd like to hear another story like hers, one carved from frost, silence, and grace, stay a while. Subscribe for more Wild West tales.